Dr. Wesley D. Willis. And before we get into today's episode, please be sure to make sure that you like, subscribe, follow if you're on Instagram. Hopefully, we'll be up live on our Instagram feed shortly. And we're on YouTube, we're on Facebook, we are on Twitter. And some people are hopefully logged into the podcast today, and we're gonna get this script going, so that so that we know what's going on. But I've been away for quite some time, as most people know. I was away in Texas fighting COVID. So shout out to all of the amazing nurses and doctors that I worked with in COVID in El Paso, Texas. You guys really did an amazing job out there in Texas. Also fighting COVID in New York. Sorry about that. In New York City, and actually also here in Georgia. So I'm excited. If you listen to my episode on meditation and mindfulness, you'd recognize today's topic is regarding adverse childhood experiences. So we're digging into what ACEs, as I like to call them, are, the research behind them, and how they impact our long-term health and how to mitigate their effects. So first, what is an ACE? Like, what is an adverse childhood experience? So an ACE is a major traumatic event or series of events that happen to you before you turn 18. For example, some form of physical abuse or neglect. Sometimes there's things like oopsies. So it doesn't even have to be that, but your environment. So the CDC reports that 61% of adults have experienced at least one ACE, which, depending on who you are and where you come from, may or may not be surprising. What should surprise you is the strong link researchers have found between people with multiple ACEs and health conditions like heart disease, diabetes, stroke, respiratory disease, and dementia. According to ACEs Aware, people with 4 to more ACEs are 38 times more likely to die by suicide, 11 times more likely to have Alzheimer's, and 1.5 times more likely to have diabetes. People with high ACEs are also likely to experience depression, anxiety, and sleep disorder. They're also more likely to engage in risky behaviors like drug and alcohol abuse, high-risk sex with large numbers of partners. In turn, people with 4 or more ACEs are at higher risk for contracting STDs. As somebody who has worked in the area of mental health for, oh my goodness, so many years. Actually, I got my first master's in 2003 from the University of Alabama at the ripe young age of 22, 23, not knowing much about the world, but recognizing kind of like, that I wanted something more. But saying, I remember stepping actually into my MSW class and was being told, like, why do you want to get an MSW? Sitting in a class of women who were 50, 60 years old, because in the state of Alabama, at the time, there was only one MSW program. So everybody went to this one school in Alabama because they controlled everything. Shout out to University of Alabama. Definitely, but they controlled everything and you had to go there. So I'm really, really excited to have on today's show Jasmine Shegog, all the way from Chi-Town, from Chicago. There's a hand clap if you don't hear it. There's a hand clap, so for you coming in today to talk about ACEs. So if you could tell people about your history, like your experience as it relates to this and your own personal experience.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me on the show. So, to introduce myself, I am from Chicago. I'm a former teacher in Chicago. I worked in Chicago for about 3 years formally. Mm-hmm. In that time frame that I worked with children, particularly kindergarten and first grade, mm-hmm. I noticed a lot of social and emotional issues that was a barrier to their academics. So, there were quick issues like, okay, they're not meeting their marks. But once you test them individually, they can meet the marks. It's the behavior that they haven't learned to control and regulate their emotions, or even self-aware of the emotions that was creating that problem that later led to, you see it in academics. So, when opposed to that, my experiences when it comes to ACEs, okay. I'm 31 years old and I'm still exploring those experiences and the effects of that. So it's interesting to see in the youth today how it is still perpetuating from generation to generation, and it's like it's a deep-seated thing that just gets overlooked. So I'm very interested in working with that and understanding that and creating resources to help in those aspects for children particularly, and hopefully it helps adults as well. Yeah. So and other than that, it's just a all-encompassing topic. So it's like it's so many pieces to the puzzle that you can talk about and put in that we could be here for days.
We could, and people don't, and I think people really don't realize how pervasive and how significant ACEs are, because sometimes we don't take the time to really just take a step back and say, well, why does that trigger me in that way? Why do I respond in that way, without really reflecting on sometimes some of the things that you experienced in your childhood? Like say for instance, having a partner who, when you say something negative to them, if they've had come from a very abusive background or physically abusive background, and they either retreat or they become very defensive as opposed to hearing feedback, because they come from a very abusive mother. So that seems like punishment to them, as opposed to in some ways, let's talk through this, as opposed to flying off the handle and different stuff like that. So your background as a teacher in Chicago, teaching Black and brown children, I feel like is incredibly significant. You see, I worked in my former life, as I like to say it, I worked for Family Children Services, doing child abuse and neglect investigations, and going and seeing kids like at the home after they experience this, or even sometimes having to go to the school because the teacher called and said, I really have some suspicions about this thing, and you're like, oh my God. I think that as a teachers, you all do such a really thankless job. A thankless job. You spend hours, that little summer that you all get off that people like to talk about, like, oh, but they get paid to have summers off, is nothing compared to the hours that you spend both inside and out of the classroom preparing for your children. So thank you for your work, and I'm excited because you transitioned actually into entrepreneurship.
Yes, I have. And I wanted to speak more about my experience.
Definitely, perfect.
As a teacher, because oftentimes I had found myself, I have a child, and you may wonder, like, why are they doing the things they do? And then you meet the parent, and you're like, oh. You're like, oh, I see why. And then it softens your heart to the child, because from my perspective, when you send your child to my classroom, I'm their parent for 8 hours. And most of the time, I'm giving them more attention than they get at home, because once they get home, they're hopefully in a routine to where they're doing their homework, they get a little TV time, then they go to sleep, hopefully. So when the children come to me, they're looking at me as their mom away from home. And so I was very conscious about what I did and what I said to them, because I knew it was going to affect them, even from my own personal experience as, growing up, looking to teachers, because they're with you for the most of the time. So when I saw that the parents probably, had some things that they haven't dealt with, and like, my favorite line is, you can't get something out of your child, you ain't got out of you.
Right.
So
right.
I took my time to be more strategic in how I approached them. And this was very much easy in the beginning when I didn't have my own son. I was, okay, I can give you a child all the attention your child needs. Then when I have my own son, it's like, whew, I got to get the parents a break. It's like, okay, it does take a village. But the hard part is separating what child just needs a little more attention and what child is really having some traumatic experiences at home that's hindering them from focusing at home. Like, we don't talk about not having enough food is traumatic.
Exactly. Exactly. Can I trust when I go home that that I'm gonna have something to eat before I go to bed, or that I'm gonna, exactly. It's traumatic.
Yeah. That's why I really think, shout out to the Black Panthers when they started the, social emotional program where they fed the kids before they went to school. Because, it's hard for me to focus on ABCs when my stomach is growling 1, 2, 3. So those things, and then it can escalate because then you have to decipher as a teacher, okay, is this child seeing something on TV or is something happening to them where they're physically involved with it? I had a child, not going to say any names, but it was very apparent that the issues that were coming up was stemming from the parental environment where there was a lot of parental conflict. And, I was like, parental conflict, okay, maybe let me sit with mom and dad, have a talk. Dad in jail. So that's traumatizing. Having your father in jail is traumatizing. Having your parents fight all day, that's traumatizing. And that was the bulk of the issues that was rampant in the Black community. Either the parent wasn't there, the parent was fighting, because we, sorry to be sad, but it's said that, Black couples don't know how to get along unless they're in the bed. And that's and it's like, okay, we got to work on that. Okay, we got to change this narrative. We got to figure out how to get along for the child's sake and for our own sake, like to better our generation.
Right.
So that was very rampant, and which is why I was adamant on having my son have a two-parent household. It took a lot of work, so I had to look at myself. I said,
right,
sis, you the toxic. It's you.
Well, I'm gonna. So the question is, why are people with ACEs at higher risk for developing these conditions? So the research shows, like, where the term ACEs comes from, beginning in 1996. A California-based medical care consortium partnership group called Kaiser Presidente teamed up with the CDC to study the effects of childhood trauma on long-term health. They coined the phrase adverse childhood experiences to categorize childhood trauma. Researchers eventually enrolled over 17,000 participants in the study and found that over half of them reported experiencing at least one ACE. Over a quarter experienced at least two. In 1998, they released their results, these Kaiser study results. We found a graded relationship between the number of categories. This was the quote. We found a graded relationship between the number of categories of childhood exposure, each of the adult health risk behaviors, and diseases that were studied. So all that, like, jargon, greater than 0.1%, experienced 4 or more categories of childhood exposure compared to those who had experienced none, had 4 to 12-fold increased health risks for alcoholism, drug abuse, depression, suicide attempts, and 2-fold increase in smoking, poor self-rated health, and greater than 50% with like various sexual partners, and all of that. So it goes on basically just to basically state that that is just really a lot of data that shows that there's all this great risks. And I want to talk back also about what you talked about. So dad being in jail, that's traumatic. And somebody may say, well, doc, like, how is that traumatic? The kid didn't experience that. How is that physical abuse or neglect? I mean, when you as a black or brown child normalize seeing your father or seeing black men behind bars, you kind of like look at that as that's where I at some point am going to be. So, because that's a normal process. But then when you get around other normal children, and that's not little Johnny's experience, and he's like expecting, oh, I'm going to go to the same school that my parents went to in college and blah, 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 blah. Mm-hmm. That is a traumatic, that creates so much anxiety, because at some point I'm going to be there at a place where I have to wear either orange or white or what, so That kind of rings so true. I think to I mean even today, especially with last year with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, and I think the just littering of pictures and experiences on TV for our black and brown children to see, and then that to hear that conversation at home with your parents or that conversation at school, and not saying that they shouldn't be aware of what's going on, but that is very traumatic. I actually even had a parent reach out to me, a colleague reach out to me because his daughter, his 12-year-old daughter, was so overwhelmed with seeing those things, and she was saying, "Daddy, I want to talk to somebody about that."
Absolutely. I think if you take it into the smallest form, you have to address the separation part. Because no matter if your father's in jail or if your parents get a divorce, that separation is going to cause some anxiety issues and some traumatic experiences. Let alone you have to now lay on the fact, okay, my parents are separated. I can't see my father every day. He's behind bars. You know, you don't really probably understand the full scope. All you know as a child is that he was here, he's not. Nothing you can do about it. Nothing any adult can do about it. So now you're understanding for the simple fact that you're also learning you can't trust your parents to be there and solve your problems.
Right.
So that it adds on so many layers to the issues that I think it goes overlooked so much because it's prevalent, and we learn to carry our baggage with us.
Right.
We learn to adapt because that's what got us through so much. And I think for the simple fact we don't take the time to think of our children as little humans. Well, humans means they have emotions, and we just assume that they know, and we just assume you do what I say, not as I do. That we have to take the time to sit down and explain to them and talk to them about what's going on. In an appropriate way. You're not gonna sit there and say your dad is in jail because you ain't gonna say that. You're gonna say it in a way that's gonna give them some type of security. Like he'll be back out soon. But mommy's gonna make sure that you have the best experiences and the best moments while we're waiting for him to get. Or if it's a divorce, we still love you. That's when you come to as a team. But we can't come together as a team because our arguments and disagreements, we magnify it as a priority over our children. And I think that's the first thing that has to we have to understand. Our children, meaning my sole purpose in life is to make sure you have a better outcome than me. What is the purpose of me having a child if you have to go through the exact same thing I went through? I went through this so you don't have to. And you have to realize, people say, well, I went through it, so I'm okay. My parents fought and argued, and I came out okay. You'll be okay. If you think that, you're not okay.
Right.
You're not okay. And, we have to do better than that. And it's going to take a lot of acknowledgement. A lot of things we don't want to acknowledge because then we have to change.
Right.
We have to do something about it.
Right.
If I just gloss over it, it's okay. But no, we have to acknowledge it, and we have to act on the things that is causing our children these traumas. And I think would be a good starting point.
Right. Well, so, in this 1998 study, identified 10 types of adverse. The first was abuse and physical, emotional. The second one was neglect. The third category was household challenge. And this can include growing up in a household with incarceration, mental illness, substance abuse, parental separation or divorce, and intimate partner violence. Now, obviously, there are many other traumatic events that a kid can go through that will fall under ACEs. The 1998 study inspired other researchers to look into ACEs, which naturally widened the demographic study by scientists. We have now identified many types of ACEs that a person can go through. Other types of ACEs: experiencing systemic racism, growing up in an under-resourced neighborhood with a lot of crime, intergenerational or epigenetic and cultural trauma, consistent food insecurity, separation from a parent because of immigration or foster care, caring for someone who is sick or disabled, struggling to be accepted by family and friends over sexuality or gender identity. The death of a parent or caregiver is also considered an ACE. And it's just the list goes on and on and on. And so many people I've met with, both because I've trained nurses in what we call trauma informed care, and I've trained doctors in trauma informed care, and I've trained so how to talk to individuals, because we're so used to being, as you know, a professional. You as a teacher to the child, I'm the teacher. I'm here to teach you and tell you, like, it can't be a bi-directional, a two-directional relationship. So as a nurse, I'm here to tell you, you need to take this medication because this is what you need. And when you've grown up around people who are constantly telling you what to do in prison systems, constantly telling you what to do at home, not listening to you, then they respond. That's a trigger for them. And they act out. And I'm not making any excuse for somebody for bad behavior. There's a difference in bad behavior, and there's a difference in triggering individuals. So a lot of times what I work with individuals about is like, so not when the patient comes in, why are you here? Can you tell me what happened to you? Can you tell me what happened? Right. And that's just that wide open thing, as opposed to saying, I'm the specialist, and I'm here. I only got one thing to do, and you need to get to it. So now, so I don't know how familiar you are with trauma informed care. Have you ever heard like being, basically, it's not even, it's, what we need to call it? Being kind. let's not call it like this big scientific word. Being kind. And we have gotten so far away from just being kind to one another.
Yes. Simple, basic, simple kindness to a next brotherly and sisterly person will go a long way, because if I'm thinking about how I'm portraying you and how you're feeling, I'm probably not going to say something. Mm-hmm. Because for the simple fact, I have that kindness and I'm having that respect level. Mm-hmm. And guilty myself. Like, I'm not perfect, guilty myself, but it was a long process for me to try to understand that what I'm seeing is not always reality. Mm-hmm. What I'm seeing is how I'm viewing this is based off my childhood experiences. Mm-hmm. How I'm looking at this person, how I'm viewing the situation, how I'm reacting to the situation is probably because of what happened to me in the past. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it took a long time for me to be okay with that. Mm-hmm. Because when I first, started having these, full transparency, I was in high school and I was bulimic. Mm-hmm. One of the first responses I got was like, "We black, we don't do that." Mm-hmm. We don't throw up, we eat our food. We don't have enough food for you to do that.
Exactly.
That's the first response, and I'm like, well, and then I was 8 years old and I took 8 excedrin pills because I just really wanted to kill myself. Mm-hmm. And first thing, what show did you watch? Mm-hmm. It's like Jesus is not gonna take you into heaven. What are you doing?
Right, and that's the answer. That's to deter you from wanting to commit suicide.
Yeah, so I was like, no, I was crying out for help and I didn't even know it. Mm-hmm. A lot of the things that was ingrained in me was self-doubt and negativity in the form of harsh criticism. Mm-hmm. Not to say that what they saying wasn't true, but as an 8-year-old, you're telling me what's wrong without helping me fix it. Mm-hmm. If I'm fat, I've always been husky. Don't tell me, I'm fat. Mm-hmm. Give me a salad. Sign me up for soccer. Mm-hmm. Those things. But at the point I'm 31 years old, well, I'm not 31 yet, but at this point, it's like
these young kids.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. At this point, I don't blame them anymore, because I realized they were doing the best that they knew how to do with their own tools. Mm-hmm. The only thing they knew was to say it, and then you fix it. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, fix what? I like food. Mm-hmm. I'm going to eat. I'm going to eat. You cook it, I eat. I eat, you cook. Like, it's like that. So it's being kind to your children and being kind to other people is something that can go a long way with minimizing these ACEs in our children. And I'm speaking from experience and from me viewing children. Mm-hmm. So that I like that point you made. Yeah.
Well, one of the things that drew us to you, and like I said, let's get her on the show, was that you are helping combat this ACEs at the beginning level. So you've written a book, so thank you for stepping out on what some people may say faith and becoming an entrepreneur and taking your expertise and your experience and saying, you know what, I got a gift to offer beyond the classroom. I don't ever want to put down anybody who's like, oh, I'm in the classroom and that's where I'm going to stay. There's nothing wrong with that. But sometimes some of us, myself included, say, you know what, let me step out on faith and let me create my own path. And you created your own path. And we're going to bring up the book that you wrote. So it's available on Amazon. And this is your son reading the book.
That's my pride and joy.
Bring it back up, please.
I always said if I was a boy,
bring up
I'll
back up
be handsome.
the kid with her son with the book. So this is your son reading your book.
Oh.
And how old is he?
He is 2.
2.
Oh my God.
Okay.
Like I said, I always say if I was a boy, I'd be handsome. He's my proof.
Oh my goodness.
But yes, he actually is the reason I even went this path. I love children, but when I, held my own son, I was looking at a child with a blank slate. He didn't have none of the experiences I had. He had none of the traumas I had. And I'm looking at him and I'm like, you gonna have a better start than me. And that was like the first decision I made, whether if that means that I'm fit, like, ask my cousin. I got pregnant my first year in my master's program. And main thing is, I'll drop out, you having a kid. I'm like, no, I'm not dropping out because I have a kid. Because I want him to know a better starting point. I knew the statistics, I knew everything. So I kept going for him. And then once he got older and you start reading books to him, I noticed that one, I didn't see a lot of books pertaining to the subjects that I knew that he needed help with, because I know I needed help with. 2, I didn't see a lot of books that he can relate to color-wise that talked about that.
Right.
So I wanted to do a twofold with that. I want to represent everybody. I'm all inclusive, black, white, Asians, everything. But for this particular series, I wanted this to showcase a black family. Mom, dad working together, sisters supporting each other, using those skills that my vision is, as the parent is reading it to their kids, they're learning how to react to the situations that's going to arise. That's an everyday situation, whether it's sibling conflict, whether if it's not controlling your anger. I don't want you to not express yourself. You should express yourself, but you have to express yourself politely, and you have to express yourself without disrespecting somebody else. And that was a hard thing that I'm still getting a grasp on. Like I said, I'm not perfect, but I'm striving. So with creating those books, it took on the life of its own very quickly, because in a sense, I was filling a void that I think people didn't realize was really there. It's quick to say, you can't do that, control yourself, but how? I'm like Kanye, I don't have all the answers, they don't have all the answers,
Right.
So I was then inspired to put like some self-help check sheets that, things that they can do when they need to stay calm, and affirmations, because I think those things would have helped me growing up, because when I got angry, it never occurred to me that I can control that. Until I was maybe started teaching. Because it's like, well, you can't go off on the kids, so you have to control yourself. And growing up in the black community, that tends to be a rampant thing. If I feel it, I'm acting on it. You have uncles and aunties, they go to the reunion and it's time to go when somebody say a word. That's my ticket, I'm gonna head out. So that was really my passion for doing it. So I was really doing something that I love, and I was doing it for people that I love. My people, other people, and my son. And so it just went from there.
Right. Well, I want to talk about stress for a second. And not all stress is bad stress. In fact, there are 3 types of stress. We have positive stress, This is the kind of stress you feel before a big moment, like a stage performance, a big test, or a big game, or maybe today. Tolerable stress, you experience this when going through a significant change. As a kid, this might be moving away from a home of friends that you've always known, changing schools, or losing a pet. If you have a decent support system to help you manage the emotions that come along with that, it's tolerable stress. And it's just that, tolerable. Toxic stress. This is the bad one. Toxic stress has no benefits. It's the stress you feel when a bad situation refuses to end, like food insecurity or homelessness. A child who goes through an ACE will experience an activated stress response. If a child doesn't have a strong support system or way to cope with that trauma or that stress, then it becomes pervasive. This turns into toxic stress, and long-term exposure to this type of stress can actually change how your brain functions. So I'm glad that you brought your book in today. So you're gonna show us your book, and let's talk about the book, because this is what we're talking about as it relates to toxic stress. Now I'm really mad, a story about control and anger. So what made, like you said, I know you said earlier that it kind of brought you to kind of help children, and then it hopefully triggers some things within these parents to behave a certain way. Tell us about the book.
Oh, okay. Well, great. The main character's named Rita. I named him after my mom.
Oh, okay, Rita. Okay, Mama Rita.
Yes. And so the book tells the story, of course, tells the story about Rita, and she's angry at her little sister. Something very simple that everyone can relate to, because she always wants to play with her. And so, a child who doesn't know how to, manage their emotion, or even wasn't taught to, or even just in the age range where they can understand what the parent is trying to teach them, she goes through that journey. And I think, the best part of this book is the end. And so it gives, after the story ends, it gives a checklist to the kid of what they can do when they get angry. And one of the things that I do want to point out that I did get a lot of questions about was when it says, apologize. People like, I'm not apologizing, you make me mad. But I want to shed light on the fact that sometimes you can realize that you're getting mad and you realize it was a silly reason. And when you get mad for a silly reason, it is totally okay to come back to that person and say, you know what, I'm sorry. That really wasn't that big of a deal to get upset about. And that's something that I was intentional about putting in the book, because I think that's something that we can learn to do. Because I may get mad that you ate my food. But in reality, that's nothing to really get mad about, to the point to where we're in conflict. And we're not talking to each other. And you got to go to the store and buy me a new one. So, these things that, these things are things that I didn't even have a clue to do growing up. It wasn't even a notion. If I'm mad, now I'm really mad. Right. So, and then the affirmations, I feel like those are very good in general for adults and children, because unconsciously you're going to start living what you speak to yourself. Right. You're going to start visualizing yourself being calm. You're going to start visualizing, normalizing that you can choose your own attitude. I do not have to let you get me upset. If that means that I'll just calm down or just respond in a calm way, it's mostly all about not what you say, but how you say it. I can say, girl, that was good. But you don't think it's good. Right. But if I say, girl, that was good. Right. You really feel that. So I think that's one of the major things that I was intentional about putting in all the books that's coming out,
Wow. Well, that is super amazing. I have a couple of quick questions. In your experience as a teacher, and as your work, do you feel that Black and brown communities are more or less resilient or susceptible to ACEs than other races?
I think for the simple fact that brown and Black children, that wealth gap, that has a big play into access to what we can do, whether it's paying for a therapist, whether it's paying for food, whether it's having the money of not to argue about money. And then those transpire into bigger issues that plays out in front of the children. Because at this point, parents are so engaged in what they're arguing about, we don't really see the children watching us. Right. So I think absolutely yes. but I also think that that doesn't rule out that other races can have those problems. So I think yes.
Okay. So I threw out a big word and I had it later on down to talk about, but we like are close to time. Resilience is this big word for basically this ability to overcome on the positive spectrum. Because let's be honest, there are two different ends of a spectrum that a person can experience. You can experience it negatively and it impact you in a very negative way versus like being resilient. It happened. I have a support system that helps me overcome it. They help me process it. They help me process what happened. And then on the other end of that, I am able to now, when it happens again, manage it in a different emotional way, or in a better emotional way, or in a healthy emotional way. So resilience is that ability, what people say, to just kind of like that to overcome. And that doesn't mean like, oh, I didn't kill myself today. You know, that's something completely different. But just the ability to kind of be up on the positive end of that spectrum. And that, again, dealing with that, what your book is helping these kids deal with, anger. Somebody took my food. Now I know next time somebody takes my food, you know, I either have extra or I'm prepared so that I don't go off and lose myself. And then, of course, the scientist in me, the doctor in me loves to think about and would love to talk about, you know, as we can talk about ACEs. And what it has shown is children and adults who have multiple traumatic events, their brain reactivity happens in the hippocampus. So that very hippocampal amygdala response, very, as you know, as a teacher, that's the emotional regulation. So when adults are just they're more likely to act out versus that frontal cortex, when they're able to kind of like that executive function, think through things rationally, say, okay, if I shoot this person just because they cut me off in traffic means that I will go to jail, and I don't want to go to jail. So versus that person who has had so many negative experiences, is very reactive, in the hippocampal amygdala area of their brain are more likely to react. They're more likely to do something, and then the consequence is like, oh my God, you know, I can't believe this happened, and you know, so forth and so on. It's too late. You know, it's too late. Now, do you have a success story related to ACEs that you can share with us today?
Well, the most egotistical one would be myself. But I want to speak to the story behind myself, which is my mother. You know, she come from my grandparents were sharecroppers in Mississippi, you know, 5th grade education. So no matter what I went through, she has went through way more. And to have 3 children who are considered a success, whether it's bachelor's degree careers and married and engaged, for her to, for the most part, be a single woman throughout the whole time, and arguably a single mother to 2, for her have these children that come out and do these type of things speaks to her strength as a mother. Speaks to her awareness to understand, like, hey, I don't know everything, but I know what happened to me, I don't want to happen to them. So I'm going to do some things differently. And, you know, I want to give my mom her roses while she's here, because that took strength. That took so much strength there, honey. So I credit my mother as a success story. Even to being a homeowner, even working, even, you know, wanting better in herself in every aspect of her life. And me growing up, I saw that. You know, I saw her struggles, but I also saw her not giving up. I also saw her, you know, adapting and overcoming, and then trying to figure out what happened wrong and correct it. And that was something that I took with me.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we got about 5 more minutes, so we're gonna go to the comments. If there's anything up there worth bringing up, just bring up what we got up there, sir.
Let's good morning to you too.
So we see a good morning up there. What else do we see going on up there? Thumbs up. We got a thumbs up going on. How is it looking over there on? Did we ever get on Instagram? So we are on Instagram. We got some thumbs up. But yeah, well, luckily, I mean, hopefully our viewers today got like a really good idea about ACEs. Can you tell people about how they can contact you, how they can buy your book, you know?
Plug.
Right.
As they say. www.jair with an S.com. That's my son's name. He's co-owner.
Oh, yes.
I started
Creating
this,
generational wealth.
Yes. All
Okay.
Of these things.
Okay.
Trust funds. I'm on Instagram at Jair's_collection as well as JJ Shegog 1220, which is my anniversary of getting married.
Okay.
And TikTok, JJ Shegog.
Yeah.
Disclaimer. JJ Shegog on TikTok has fun. That's what we're gonna say. And Facebook as Jair's Collections as well. So you can get in touch. My books are on Amazon, Target, Barnes and Nobles, and my website as well. So I love to connect with you all.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you all so much for tuning in. You all have a great day. I mean, so we're going to bring up her book and we're going to probably continue to chat, but thank you all for spending 45 minutes with the nurse doc. Have a good day.
Thank you.